So Paul gives us, if we flip back to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, he gives us the hope. Because he says, to the married, I give this command, I not the Lord, a wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and a husband must not divorce his wife. See, it's there. It's both genders. It's both sides of it. That must remain unmarried or be reconciled. That's the real key, is that you are waiting to be reconciled to your spouse. Now, here's another thing that will come up. That's not fair. You're right. It's not fair. That's the crazy thing about sin. It wasn't fair that Jesus died. And I'm not trying to just make arbitrary, dismissal statements about fairness. But when you look at the love of Christ, when you look at the interaction that Christ has with his people, that he has with you, when you look at how we're called to be good to one another in these things, the love of Christ always walks through the hurt. The love of Christ has no self-centeredness. It doesn't consider self. The love of Christ considers others. Now, that doesn't say that this is in a vacuum, that there wouldn't be difficulty, that there wouldn't be trial, that there wouldn't be these things. But what I would say, and you can disagree with me, is this: the bottom line, if your spouse divorces you, the goal is to act like Jesus. Now, in a practical way, at the end of Ephesians 5, and we looked at this last week, there's something really important, because Paul says this. He says a husband must see to it that he loves his wife. And it's not agape. It's the word there is to cherish his wife. Literally to kiss is what it is. It's the idea of cherishing. He says a husband must see to it that he cherishes his wife. And a wife must see to it that she respects her husband. So here's the thing. In general, there can be outliers, but in general, men and women perceive love differently. Right? Women perceive love by being cherished. And it can be different things. If I get up off the couch and do the dishes, my wife feels cherished. So like once a year, no matter what, I make sure, whether it needs it or not. That's just something when she feels that I understand that she has work to do and I pitch in, or, that she perceives cherished by me. And I might have a weird, there's no might about it. I'm broken and weird, but I'll tell you what, I'm not condoning pet peeves, because I think that they're just kind of code for I like to be selfish in this area. But when we first got married and we dialogue, I would constantly get interrupted. And it would enrage me, which is not good. I'm not advocating for that. But for some whatever reason, I think it's because my folks just perpetually interrupted each other. It was really bizarre in our house. And they still do. But anyway. So over time in our communication, she learned that it upsets me. I'm not validating. I say I should get upset. But it upsets me if I get interrupted like that. If I'm trying to communicate a thought and it gets interrupted. So a crazy thing began to happen. She doesn't have to not interrupt me, right? And I don't have to do the dishes. Because I'm my own man. In my own house. Right? And I can have that attitude, can't I? And I will end up single. No, she loves me. She's really kind. She probably wouldn't divorce me for that. But you see what I'm saying? Like, I can demand my rights. I can go to the old nature and say, I don't have to do the dishes. I've been at work all day, or whatever stupidity I can come up with, right? Justification for it. And she can say the same thing. She'd be like, you know why I keep interrupting you? Because your thoughts are stupid and they're not worth hearing. Right? But if she does that, are we going to communicate? Or if I do that, are we going to communicate? Typically, no, we're not. We're going to drift. And then what happens in a relationship when you stop communicating and you drift? You start making junk up, don't you? It's weird, the kind of stuff that we can make up. All of a sudden, there's these crazy miscommunications, and, oh, you did this, and you meant that I'm stupid. And you're like, oh, no, I just was thinking it'd be nice to have some salt with dinner. And then we get all this stuff that kind of, you hate my food, or you don't appreciate me, or and it's like, whoa. It's because we drift. So it's important when we look at what's happening here, when we look at marriage and it's failing, that we really look at, am I acting like Jesus? Am I walking in the new nature? Or am I walking in my old nature? Because my old nature will always say, make sure I'm taken care of. Make sure I'm justified. Make sure whatever it is. And it's out of fear. That's the crazy thing. It's out of fear. If I don't stand up for myself, I'll lose my identity. I'll lose who I am. This person will prevail over me. You know, in 1 Peter, we don't have time, there's an incredible verse where Paul kind of lays out again, or I'm sorry, it's in Peter. Paul doesn't lay it out, Peter does. Peter lays out, again, that simple idea of respect and cherish, right? He lays it out again. And one of the things that when he's talking to wives, he says, he makes the point of respecting your husband and considering all these things, and then he says, and not being overcome with fear. Because I think in oftentimes, men too sometimes, but in women there can be this fear that if I don't establish myself, I'll get usurped by this man and I'll lose myself. And so therefore I have to stand up and say no and all these things. And again, we're talking about conversations. We're not talking about violence or something like that. And what Peter's saying there is we don't want to succumb to that fear. And men, we don't want to be jerks and then be surprised why our wives aren't attracted to us. It's a very mutual thing. So Paul says at the end of the day, he says, if you get divorced, he says, you need to wait to see if you can be reconciled. So in practical speak, what happens if you get divorced and you're waiting? My opinion, again, and this is just from these different scriptures that we read, once your spouse goes and is with someone else, they're with someone else. That sexual bond is broken, and now they're with someone else. And if you asked me, I'd say you are free. Now, but what if you're the adulterer? What if you go, oh, I've actually met a person that years and years and years ago was talking to me and basically said, yeah, I cheated on my wife, and the Bible says that now she can divorce me, and she is, and it's going to work out because now I'm going to marry someone else. And I was like, that's an interesting idea. So your interpretation of the scripture and God's heart is that let's completely ruin your spouse's emotional state, security, and then that's good because she'll leave you and you can have what you want. It's kind of weird. I would say this, if you're the adulterer and your spouse divorces you, you need to seek the Lord. Because the reality is, I don't know what you should do. You should probably take a real hard look at why you did that. Real hard look at in your own heart. Because we can blame a lot of reasons on other people. I wasn't getting enough sex. She didn't respect me enough. He didn't cherish me enough. He didn't provide the way I liked. Whatever it might be, we can come up with a lot of reasons why we're going to go down those roads. But the reality is, every one of us that sins against our spouse in some way, we sinned against them because we chose to do it. It didn't matter how we got treated. It didn't matter what they did to us. We chose. If our spouse is yelling at us and we decide to scream back, guess whose sin that is? Ours. If our spouse is manipulating us and we decide to try to manipulate them back, guess whose sin that is? That's ours. For what we did. We're always responsible for what we did. So we have the opportunity as Christians, as married people, to humble ourselves and attempt to cherish and to respect. And when you get two people, and this is probably societally very unpopular, even from what I've seen, when you get one man and it can go either way, but especially one man who humbles himself and cherishes, it's amazing how that wife will respond. It really is. And even the opposite's true to an extent also. When you get one woman that's willing to respect her husband, listen to him, not mock him, these type of things, then at the end of the day, it'll be impressive how much that man will be willing to communicate with you and to walk with you on that. Yeah. Interesting stuff, human beings. So what's the point of all this in these two verses that we just spent half an hour on? It's one of the hardest, I think, dilemmas to work with, because what we have is a lot of emotion, a lot of feelings. We have an old nature that's rotten, and we have a new nature that's trying to pierce through years and years of old nature living. And in a marriage, when there's familiarity, for some reason, it just seems easier and easier and easier to despise what we're familiar with. When the reality is that this person who's next to us is an eternal being and a son or a daughter of Christ, a creation of God. And we should be treating them, whether we're getting divorced or not getting divorced, whether they're being kind or not being kind, we should be treating them like Jesus would treat them.